the Narrative.
Hey everybody, welcome to Forge the Narrative. My name is Paul Murphy, your host for Yellow Bell and Lost Souls podcast. This is episode 292, I think. I'm mentioning it because we're getting close to episode 300. Gonna try to build up towards that and get some cool special things happening and get leading up to episode 300. I'm joined tonight by Mr. Chris Morgan.
Back in red.
And Jim Vessel.
What is going on, everyone?
Jim, thanks for joining us and bringing some credibility to this broadcast.
You got way more credibility than me, man.
I resemble that.
Well, we're going to talk about some chaos stuff, so I thought, why not get the expert?
Great.
We're going to talk a little bit about Warcry, and I want to talk about chess clocks right now.
Let's do it.
In the middle of this episode, I'm going to insert a piece with I did with Matthias Weeks, one of the organizers of Adepticon. He's been on the show before. An absolute great dude. I'm going to hang out with him at Gen Con here in a week, and we talk a little bit about what's upcoming. They got Golden Demon this year. There's some other things, and just basically how mega Adepticon is. I mean, you guys know that, but this sheer volume of work that goes into making this so amazing for us, I definitely want to celebrate that and get them on as often as possible. So that's in the middle of the show. So chess
should
clocks.
be awesome.
Yeah, chess clocks. So in competitive 40k, there is a move to take the game to using chess clocks or some timing device where, in theory, the two players split the time evenly. Not everyone has chess clocks. Certainly, not all the organizers have purchased chess clocks for every table. I mean, you gotta think, let's just talk about the economics of it for a second, that running a tournament for 40k is not easy in the fact that you have to have all these artifacts, these physical things that you have to create, store, transport, manage or whatever. And then when you add on another $15, $20 device to every table, you really start spiking the cost of the buy-in for any organizer that would be doing that. Now, so it's just not, you can't take it for granted that it's going to be there. Of course, some players have brought their own, there's solutions to this, but even then, when you're asking casual players to spend 20 more bucks on something, then, it could be a problem. But I don't mean to be like waylaying the conversation either. I guess what I'm doing is framing maybe why it's not everywhere already right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of different schools of thought on the implementation of chess clocks. I remember before the ITC chess clock rules got put into effect, there was a very large and ongoing conversation among a lot of the tournament organizers, many against, many for, but it was all about the idea of slow play, right? Chess clocks are there as an insurance, as a fix for slow playing games and people feeling like if I had just gotten a fair amount of time playing this game, then I could have won. It's a control for that. And there's definitely a reason that it's a subject of discussion among the community competitively right now.
Let me give a counterpoint if I can, is that the clocks are there to enforce an equitable amount of time for the two players. And then some counterpoints to that is, well, I play X army and it requires more time to play just by the nature of it. Is this even fair to me? So, yeah, just throwing out some food for thought as we have this conversation.
I would just be devil's advocate there. I've played with armies with 150, 160 plus models and finished games on time, like with my half of the time on a chess clock. So I think the claim that, just because your army has a lot of models, you're going to always take more time. I think there is a correlation between the time it takes to play your game and how many models you have. Obviously, when you have more activations, when you have more dice to roll, there is a direct correlation between those things. But I would push back on the notion that, people that play, armies with low model count play quickly, and people that play with many models play slowly. I think there's a correlation between those two things, but from my experience playing I almost play every game on chess clock now, even in casual games, just as to get a feel for the game. The bigger factor in how fast you play is your decision making, is your physical speed. And I know sounds like a little bit of a weird concept, and it's something that, as a chef is very important, which is you can move very efficiently and not waste any movement. But if the actual movement of your arms is slow, like if how fast you move your arms, if how fast you pick up your dice is slow, you essentially are a slow player. And a lot of players don't pay attention to that speed of the game. And I think when you're playing with a limited time, it's really important that you can speed up those areas of the game, like how fast you actually roll dice, things like fast rolling dice, using things like the dice app. There's lots of strategies and tactics to actually play a lot quicker. So I think I'd push back on that notion that like it's just for people with a lot of models. I actually play it on everyone because I don't trust people with too few models. I feel like there's something else going on maybe.
You mean like 6 Knight people or just shifty in general? You can't get behind that?
Yeah, I mean usually it's Eldar. So, you always got to keep an eye on them.
Well, okay, I agree with you first off. As a Plague Zombie player from old, I've never not finished a game. You just focus, where, and I can't remember the exact term, but something like the economy of motion or something is, I forget what the term is, but I get what you're saying. You just gotta be efficient with what you're doing and keep it, maybe you don't have the conversation during your movement phase. You don't have that table talk. And that's another thing that, I've heard people talk about, like when they play this game, even competitively, they want to have that kind of free verse and exchange of pleasantries and emotion or whatever with their opponent, and have that not be boiled out of the game because everyone's focused on how quickly they hit that time clock button. So again, I'm playing devil's advocate. My actual opinion on this, and I've stated it before, is that the clocks are good for competitive 40k. I think it adds a little bit of drama. It really does split the time, and that's one of the biggest arguments. One of my buddies, co-captain of my gaming club with me, is one of the things he says to people is like, how could it not seem fair to you that we both get the same amount of time to try to play this game?
Right.
And I can go all the way back to, when Tau were shooting everybody off the table in 5th edition, it's like they rolled dice for 2 hours and I put models back in the box for 30 minutes. Like, that's not an exchange. That's not a gameplay, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's the one thing that you can control. So you can't control what armies people take. And there's no way we could come up with a formula that would essentially, you plug in how many models you have and what army you're playing, and you plug in how many models that you have and what army you're playing, and then it'll tell us how many minutes we each get based on the round time. Like, there's no way we could, come up with any sort of device like that. So I think the fairest way, as you mentioned, is to split that time. And just to go back to your first point, you can buy the kind of standard chess clock that everyone uses. It's by a company called Leap. I'm not paid by them. I'm just telling you what the name of the brand is, for about $20 on Amazon shipped next day. So I get the idea that, like for me, the chess clock is another accessory, just like my tape measure, just like my dice, just like my codex is. So for me, it's just part of the things I need to play the game. And so if you think about it that way, every player ultimately is responsible for bringing their own clock. And that way the burden doesn't have to lay on the TOs. And it's, given how many thousands of dollars we spend on this hobby, the $20 clock that is going to essentially last you for, the life of the hobby, the life of your competitive hobby, it's not a huge investment. So
I agree. So now what happens? Now, once let's say we all move to clocks, and now what happens when we start using them, and then what is supposed to happen when that time runs out?
As far as the ITC is concerned.
Well, okay. I mean, let's talk. Yeah, so we can look at there's published ITC rules for this, and I think we can frame the conversation within the context of that. But then we've got to put in the fact that yes, there are rules, but then yes, we are all people, and I've never seen a clock run to 0 and have there be a graceful exchange between the players.
Yeah,
haven't seen it yet.
It's definitely one of those feel bads. The clock rules, the standard ITC clock rules. Obviously, the TOs are welcome to play with their own set of clock rules if they want. And I'm glad the ITC put out their ones. They're pretty punitive once you run out of time. Like, you don't really have a lot of recourse. But what I will say is, and this is another thing to kind of keep in mind, is 40k is not the first competitive tabletop game to use clocks. War Machine, which is sounds like it's a pretty bad decline these days, but War Machine was kind of the original super competitive tabletop game that used clocks. And the clocks in War Machine they're called death clocks, because literally as soon as you run out, you automatically lose the game. Whereas in 40k, at least you have some recourse to, make saves or score points, and the game you don't automatically lose, which I think is a little bit less punitive. The War Machine rules are incredibly punitive, and if that was the case where you would lose the game if you ran out of time, I'm sure players would be even more intense about their clock management.
Chris, you got the rules, right?
Yeah, there are only two things you can do if your time runs out. And just like Jim said, you make your saving throws and leadership tests, and you score objectives that either already have been achieved or that your models are currently holding on the table. You basically can't take any voluntary action once the clock is run out. And I had some experience with this. It was kind of interesting, Paul. You mentioned having never seen a graceful run out of time. Mine was, it was a situation where it didn't really make sense that I had run out of time until I really thought about it, because I was fighting something like 200 plus termagants. And the amount of time I spent trying to kill these things and my own lack of discipline on when he was rolling saves to change the clock from my time to his time, which is something that's written in the chess clock rules. I wasn't as on top of it as I could have been. So it's really my own fault, and it did cost me that game. But that is less the fault of the chess clock rules and more a fault of my lack of diligence and not having as much practice with them at the time. So I think that there's a little bit of ownership that players need to take. And this wasn't a finals match by any stretch of the imagination. This guy had proactively, because he had a large model count army, he had proactively and out of respect for his opponents, brought his own and said, hey, I know I've got a big army, I've got movement trays, I'm on top of this, but we're still going to do this because at the end of the game, you will know whether or not I took more time than you did to do this.
Then he slow rolled his saves for you, is what you're saying. I'm kidding. I don't know the guy. I'm not casting dispersions at all. I'm just, but okay, but you ran out of time. And so, that's what happened. So then it takes us back to this thing. You just gave me a story about how your clock time ran out and it wasn't your fault. And that is, no matter how pure your intent, that is the exact same story I've heard from everyone who's ever hit zero.
Well, right. I said it was my fault.
Well, okay. Yes. You then mentioned the fact that you were not as disciplined or whatever. You get what I'm saying? There's some other reason than just the actual gameplay.
Right. Well, and I'm not trying to shirk responsibility for this
you're
at
not.
all.
It's a great example. It's a great example.
And that's something that I took away, right? If you're going to lose a game and if you're going to look at how you did and what you did to win that game the next time you play it, then you've got to be honest with yourself about one of those things. And it wasn't the chess clock's fault that I lost that game. It was my fault I lost that game because we both, as players, part of the social contract, agreed that we were going to use it under those stipulations.
Gotcha.
Right. And I think at the end of the day, the most important rule of all the chess clock rules is that you are responsible for your own time. And that brings a really good scenario that I've had happen a lot, which is have maybe the first third of the game be a little bit looser on the clock. So maybe I don't hit it over every time he makes saves or leadership or any sort of dice rolls that the opponent has to do. Sometimes even during a combat phase during my turn, I won't necessarily flip it over because it's just, it's my turn. I just want to kind of play through it. But then a lot of times about, maybe 2/3 or halfway through the game, as I'm starting to kind of see where we're at in the game turn. So are we about halfway through the game or do I feel like, we're going to be, we're only on turn 2, right? And there's half the time gone. I will generally be more diligent about passing the clock over. And that's something that actually can catch a lot of people off guard because they think you're essentially changing the rules of the clock mid-game. And I think it's something that you just got to be really clear with your opponent and say, hey, look, I know that, they'll say, hey, I didn't think we were doing that. They'll say something like that. I thought we weren't passing the clock over every time I made a save. And it's like, well, at the start of the game, I wasn't playing that way, but as we're starting to get tight on time, I'm going to take ownership of my clock and make sure that it's only on me when I'm doing actions. And I think if you can say that in a courteous way, most people understand, and they might still not play it that way to you. They might still insist that it stays, or they might still leave it on their clock. When you're making saves. But ultimately that's their choice, right? So I think that's really important. I've definitely seen people kind of I don't want to say get salty, but definitely feel like, oh, okay, it's going to be that, that you get those moments in the game where either call someone on something, a rule, or you are just trying to play a clean game and they give you the kind of, oh, it's going to be that kind of game.
Yeah, you're accused of being a sweaty tryhard because you're
right.
3 1/4 inch out and that's just the way it is.
Yeah. And I think definitely with the chess clocks, you can get that sometimes because people feel like as soon as you try to essentially take responsibility for your time, now you're being serious. Now it's all about winning. It's not about, you know what I mean? And I think that's a poor attitude to have.
But in the defense, best practice is to be consistent. While I agree with you, it is not, it's not something that they can say, well, you shouldn't do that now because you didn't do it before. I think it is on you to be consistent about it so that people don't get confused. Because the last thing you want to do is have a judge come over to resolve a clock dispute. And this happened at LVO as a judge. We were very clear with people. You never get to touch your clock to pause the clock. Only judges get to do that. And we had to card people for doing that repeatedly because we take it so seriously.
Right. And I agree with that. And I definitely think that's, pausing the clock is in a different ball game than, passing over the clock, more aggressively, I guess. And you are right. And I think where you got to be careful is, for instance, and this has happened to me a lot, maybe we play the first 2 games where we don't hit the clock over, and then on turn 3, my opponent or I decide I'm going to start hitting the clock back to you when you make a save or when you're doing certain actions during my turn. Well, if they're used to not getting the clock on them, they might actually not even realize that you've done that. And then all of a sudden, they don't hit it back to you after that action because they're under the impression it's still on your time. And then 2-3 minutes go by. So I think the important thing as well is if you do pass the clock over, and this is something that I always practice, is I always verbalize to my opponent when the clock is on their time. I'll say clock to you or clock over to you, just so that there's not that feel bad moment. And that actually happened to me last weekend. And it actually cost me the game, where my opponent felt like I was trying to get the clock on his time and then not say anything.
Oh, he felt like you were trying to slip it in there.
That's right. And then it ended up actually costing me the game. And I mean, I could tell you the larger story if you guys are interested.
I want to hear this clock drama, man. No, you don't have to get too deep into it, but whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah. So what I will tell you is that there's 2 very important rules with the clock. The first, as I just mentioned, is make sure you're verbalizing to your opponent when it's on their time. The second is make sure that if your round starts late or if your opponent gets to the table late, you don't have a generic, so I generally play with, for a 3-hour round, I'll play with generally an hour 25 on my clock, so that we essentially have 10 minutes each, or 10 minutes together to get to the table, say our hellos, kind of get settled. So it's not like as soon as we arrive at the table, we're on the clock. Exactly, right? And my mistake in this event was to not adjust the total time for the round. So what ended up happening was I set an hour and 20 clock because it was 2 hour, I believe it was 2 hour and 45-minute rounds. So I set an hour 20 each on our clock, which gives us essentially 2.5 minutes of time to waste, right? And that 2.5 the round, he got to the table late. The long and short of the story was at the end of my turn 5, I had 10 minutes on my clock left, but the judge, they called the round. So he had run out of time. He had clocked out his time, and I had 10 minutes left, and I had played my 5th turn with the intention that I would get my 6th turn because I still had over 10 minutes left. Mm-hmm. And the judges basically, and this was the final round on day 1, and the judges actually said, dice down. And I lost the game by 1 point because I didn't get to play my final turn because I was playing for that 6th turn. And during the game, the first rule I also broke, which was I passed the clock to him. He didn't notice, and about 10 minutes went by because I also didn't realize what was happening. And so during the game, about 10 minutes of the clock was on his turn after I'd passed it over. And so he got very upset during the game and demanded that I give him 10 minutes of my time, which of course I did because I didn't want him to feel like, I was cheating him. And so I let the clock run for 10 minutes on my time. And had I followed the code of the clock and said, you know what, the clock is your responsibility. If 10 minutes has gone on your time, that's 10 minutes of your time. I could have been that guy and I didn't, but ultimately I lost that game because I didn't get to play my turns and I planned for that 6th turn because the total clock time actually was longer than the round time. So I would generally even maybe always, before you start the clock, always check to see where you're at the round time and ensure you give yourself a little bit of a buffer. So you don't want that to happen.
That's a good point. And, you are mentioning this communication with your opponent. And that's what, we're big proponents of that because you don't get those feel bad moments, or at least you minimize the feel bad moments with who you're playing because you say, I'm moving here. I know this may be a long range, but let me go ahead and measure. Okay, you see I moved enough. I'm within 42 inches or whatever, or before you start nudging models, this is a 7-inch charge. That's the type of stuff that you communicate to your opponent. And so everyone knows what the score is when it's time to roll the dice, no matter what happened, no matter if you bump the table or whatever. And I think this applies directly to this clock usage too. And again, I don't want it to go unstated that I think that the clock is great for competitive 40K. It's not great for, Beer and Pretzels 40K or testing out, play testing in your, before your list leading up to the tournament, unless you're trying to practice your clock management, your speed and moving your horde or whatever, which I suggest. It is really good for competitive 40K. I think we're going to get moved closer and closer to it. I think it is inevitable that this becomes the standard.
Absolutely.
But we'll see. I don't play with a clock very often. I played with a clock at the ATC, mostly because my opponent suggested it, and I'm fine with it. I mean, again, I don't, the closest game I came to not finishing was actually against a night player.
Interesting. So that confirms my suspicions earlier. He probably only had four models.
He had, I think 6 models, maybe 7. I can't remember exactly. But he was fairly new to the game and deciding what he wanted to do with his weapons, and I also kind of put him in kind of a couple of bad situations where he had to try to get creative with some charges and stuff, and with terrain. Like it was ATC. Sometimes you get to pick a very favorable table to, with your matchup. And it was like a perfect storm for him. And he tried to have to think his way out a lot. So I kind of get it, but it's just kind of ironic. I guess that's the right use of ironic that the guy with the fewest models took the longest to play.
For sure. And just one last thing to add to that, speaking of ATC, I think, and I'm probably in a little bit of a bubble just because I'm playing, very competitively at the kind of higher ends of competitive play. But one thing that always surprises me, and I guess in my head I just assumed everyone at this point is playing on clocks when it comes to events, but I'd say about half the people I played at ATC had never played on a clock before. So I pulled out the clock, and I'm like, and I always say, I'm not just like, here, we're playing on a clock. I'm like, hey, do you mind if we play on a clock? Try to be at least like, pretend that they have a choice in the matter. I don't want to kind of force down the throat. And, all my opponents were great, and they're like, sure, I've never done it before, but like, and I was like, you know what, man, I'm going to make sure that, I talk you through it. I'll make sure that I'm very aware of like making sure you switch back time. So just assisting my opponent so that he doesn't think it's this big boogeyman, but that I'm helping him manage his clock. And I've had games where I've actually, like, every time the opponent does, like, I've actually been almost the only one touching the clock, and I'm there managing it for my opponent because I want them to get familiar with the idea of that clock. And almost all of those games, we never had any issues. We never had time issues or any issues where I felt, it didn't end up being a factor is I guess my point, but it at least makes you feel comfortable if that's something that you're worried about.
Well, I mean, the game is built, especially tournament games where you are trying to score points. The tournament is better if everyone can get their games to a natural conclusion.
For sure. And I will say, I mean, with ITC scoring, I know you're not supposed to pause clocks, but sometimes when you're trying to score at the end of every battle round or every turn, that can actually sometimes take up, 2 or 3 minutes. And so I think there does need to maybe be some sort of, guideline or something around scoring, because oftentimes I want to know how the round was scored before I start my turn. And a lot of times with ITC, because it's so complex, you almost need both players to kind of score it simultaneously and talk each other through the score.
Yeah,
so that you don't end up with like a discrepancy at the end and then a bunch of arguments, So
well, especially some of this stuff, it's like, well, did you do the 8th wound to that, or was it only 7, or or did you get 1 point or 2 points from this Kingslayer
right.
or whatever?
Or how many did you kill? I got 2, you got 3. Okay, no. Oh, I forgot this model that you killed in this turn. Oh, how many points you got for Reaper? How many demons did you bring back? Like, there's just so many little things that can start to cut into the time.
Those things I think are the best to just do as it happens and say it as it happens to your opponent. But I agree. I mean, there's some discussion that we could have about the chess clock rules. It's all kind of ongoing, and we are incorporating feedback when we design that, and when we, that's why there's some working text. If you look on the article, there's some red text there with examples and things that we're trying to say, well, you can't do this. Like, you can't just assume a combat goes through and pull models, for example. Like, there's things that have changed, and I think that's something that's worth mentioning. There is a lot of bookkeeping on the ITC missions. So, but doing it as it happens, saying, okay, that's 8 wounds, I'm marking it down, that's something that kind of saves you from trying to wrap everything up and tie it up with a bow at the end of the round and trying to decide, well, whose time gets used up by this.
Right.
Well, it's a work in progress, and acceptance of this is a work in progress. But I think that as we start, streaming more, having more structure around competitive events, having them, giving more weight to them, it's just as far as, how it affects the community and all that kind of stuff. Clocks are going to be a part of that. They're going to play some factor.
And it's unfortunate that the main, I almost bet the main reason that we ended up with kind of clocks being adopted so well wasn't necessarily because games were finishing, but because of intentional slow play. So it's one thing to say have a really tight game that you guys get to game 5 or to say turn 5, but it's another thing when there was a slew of events kind of early last year that you could tell there was reports of intentional slow play, and I think that's really what it's meant to combat rather than you guys just only got to turn 5. That doesn't necessarily mean anyone played slow. It could have just been a really tight game with a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, and they're not there to penalize somebody that wants to have that kind of, I don't want to say lazy approach to the game. I don't mean lazy. I mean, or more relaxed feel of the game. It's not there to penalize any people like that. But, again, this goes into some of the detractors from people that play casually to playing competitively, which, by the way, I really don't like that distinction because we all play competitively. People enjoy winning the game when they sit down to try to play. Mm-hmm. Whatever. I get it. But, they don't want to encounter those people that are guilty of the things that you're talking about. And let me stress how much they are in the minority out there in the field. It gets a lot of talk sometimes because it's fun to pick that kind of thing apart, but the actual amount of people out there that do that is incredibly slim. And if it gave us something that ends up being strengthening the competitive scene and circuit, so be it.
Yeah, I mean, all rules exist for a reason. I mean, the code of conduct is another example of that. It's not because the majority of people have been doing XYZ. It's because high profile or very publicly seen people are perceived as doing XYZ. We have a couple bad eggs that just make it harder for everybody else. So don't be that.
It's like some street signs that say, don't back up on a one-way street or whatever. Somebody did that one time and now we have to make rules for it.
Don't let children play inside your oven.
Well, let's take a break. We'll come back with a spot with me and Matthias from Adepticon, and then we'll come back and talk about maybe some Warcraft stuff. And then we'll close out talking about Chaos stuff at the segment after that. See you all right on.
FTN is brought to you by Discount Games Inc. Please visit them at www.discountgamesinc.com. And don't forget to ask Jay about ways to save even more on your hobby projects.
Hey everybody, welcome to a Community Spotlight segment of Forge Narrative. My name is Paul, your host. I'm joined tonight by Matthias Weeks.
Hey Paul, good to be back.
Yo man, you've been on the show before, but in case anyone doesn't remember, you are one of the main organizers for Adepticon.
That is correct. 18 years.
18. It's become a mega, one of the gems. I mean, this is one of the only real, in my opinion, true convention for hobbies like ours.
Yeah, I think that, there's several other events that are doing kind of a similar format of us, but I mean, we just have the age behind us at this point where, we're the old guy in the room,
Come on, you got thousands of people that come to your gig, man. I mean, your thing.
Yeah. We've gone from 88 people in year one to about 5,700 last year. So that's a pretty significant improvement.
And that's just registered attendees. Like you guys open it up to the public.
Right.
People can walk in and see what's happening.
Yeah, it's a semi-unique thing to our event. Yeah, we are open to the public. We don't require you to purchase a badge. If you just want to come up and hang out, check out, shop in the vendor exhibitor hall, maybe pick up some demos. You only require you to purchase a badge if you're attending a hobby seminar, playing in an event, entering one of the painting competitions.
I think I've been coming for the last 14, 15 years. I don't remember exactly when I started, but we heard about the team tournament way down here in the South. We heard about this 4-man team tournament, and we had to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's been our flagship event since maybe year 2. I think year 1, it was kind of like a weird doubles thing, or I can't remember. It was just a different format. And then, it's gone through a couple of different versions. It used to kind of be this insane 1-day cram everything in event. And then we backed off a little bit, realizing, that's the event we wanted to mainly focus on where, we're still running singles championship style events. And there's other events out there that are doing, larger 40K singles events. Like our kind of focus flagship event has always been that 4-man team tournament event.
Yeah.
And we backed off a few years ago and we turned that into a 2-day event and really kind of gave it the room to breathe.
It's amazing. I'll be there again this coming year. So how many events, and when I say giant convention, Superstar, we talked about the thousands of people, how many events could people participate in, or has the option to participate in throughout the weekend?
So last year, I think we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 660 individual things happening, and that includes hobby seminars, tournaments, some scheduled demos. There were even lots of demos that weren't scheduled, some role-playing and board game tournaments. GW preview night, Mantic night, like all of those types of things added up to about 660 individual things you could schedule yourself.
You heard him right, and that does not include the open painting. The guys have a 30, 40 foot table set up for people to come paint. That doesn't count people playing games after hours in the hall or in the lobby.
Right. Yeah. We, had about, I think they can accommodate about 40 people down in the hobby seminar room that runs 24 hours, 4 days straight. And then, we have open gaming space. We have halls that open up, say 8 or 9 o'clock at night that provide, 3 to 4 hours of additional, gaming time for pickup games, playing games with people from, across the country you don't get to play in person very often. So lots of that happens too.
And you guys, this is in a huge convention center, and you guys would actually sprawl out to some other other hotels for some of the other events. Some of the self-contained larger events on their own.
Yeah, we experimented with that a little bit last year with some of the Fantasy Flight properties, Legends of the Five Rings, Keyforge, moving them to an off-site location. We don't have, I would consider, the ultimate solution for that in place yet. We've got a couple of options for 2020, but nothing that we're set in stone with yet. But we're seeing what we can do. We're kind of at the point where we're hitting capacity at our current venue, so we're working with them. We're working with some local event spaces, try to get a little creative and see what makes sense. Even
if we do have to slum it in this convention center for another couple of years, I think that's still, that's more than any event, right? Than any other place? 700 events close to it, Yeah,
in terms of what we focused on, for not comparing ourselves to monstrosities like Gen Con or Origins or Dragon Con or anything like that.
But this is something wargaming. if you are wargaming and you want to come to the hottest and biggest wargaming thing in the world, in my opinion, I know that there are some other things like Salute, or I think it's Salute in Europe, but anywhere over here in the States, Adepticon is it.
Yeah, I think so. I religiously go to Gen Con and I love that event, but it's never been a great miniature focused event that everybody's there, right? The exhibitor hall is 3 football fields wide. Mm-hmm. And, where our event is really kind of laser focused on miniature tabletop wargaming. Almost all of our exhibitors in the exhibitor hall are dealing in that genre. 90% of our games are in that. We're focused. That's what we started out with. We've expanded a little bit here and there over the years into board games. We throw a few RPGs in to sort of just pad out the schedules. We throw a few card games in and stuff like that because there's some, it's nice to have some smaller events to sort of pad out. Maybe not everybody wants to play, 8 hours a day, 4 days straight of tabletop wargaming, but, that's always going to be our main focus.
Well, the hobby classes are legit too, and I'm not casually using that word. You have some GW people there. I'm talking about like Duncan Rhodes teaching classes. You've got other well-known painters, like big-time painters that you see on the internet, and, you probably give their photo a like on Instagram or something. The convention is big enough to attract all those guys, but yet still small enough to be where all those guys are accessible, if you get the opportunity or if they're in a hanging out mood.
Oh yeah. I think, that has become a mini convention within our convention at large, in the sense that we were just talking about this weekend, trying to run some numbers to figure out how many people are attending Adepticon and only taking hobby seminar classes. I suspect that number is very large. With painting competitions that we've had at Adepticon, the Crystal Brush previously, and now with the Golden Demon coming back to the United States and being hosted at Adepticon.
We gotta talk about that. That's amazing.
Yeah, I imagine we will. We attract, instructors, from essentially at this point, a lot of European painters, all over the world have come. We get some some incredible talent that are coming to compete. And if they come to compete, most likely we can talk them into also teaching a few classes. And that's giving people access to incredible hobby instructors. And we've also been able to expand that. I want to say there was close to 130 classes over the weekend last year, and that's run by Damon Drescher with Kat Jackson and a few other people helping them out. They're doing a fantastic job. They have great relationships with that community. And, we've brought in, aside from just your classic painters, we've done everything from some tactic style 40k classes with some of the Team USA people. We've done
I did one of those
photography
for you guys in the past.
You did? Yeah.
Yeah.
We've done some photography. We've done some hey, you want to start a YouTube channel. So we're starting to look at some other ways, aspects of the hobby that people may be interested in. And hey, look, there's a wealth of knowledge at Adepticon, and this is the place to, talk to those people.
Would you like me to...
You could sit down in that. What's that?
I said, would you like me to do one on how to podcast?
Yeah, we probably could. Totally. I don't know if we've actually done a podcast-oriented one, to tell you the truth. We've done a YouTube channel one.
Could be a track.
I don't know if we've actually
media track. How do you want to get into the media? How do you want to become a content creator?
Sure.
For this game.
Yeah, we're always looking for lecture-style stuff like that. So we have a couple of smaller classes that are perfect for smaller lecture-style events that aren't hands-on, sculpting or whatever. So get in touch with that crew for sure.
It's cool that it even exists. That's the kind of, I'm more saying it because you can, when I'm talking about this convention, you can come to these places and get this type of experience, in between you may only play in one tournament. You may play in no tournaments, but you may be able to play in one tournament on Saturday night and then have 7,000 of your closest gaming buddies around you to hang out and do stuff with for the rest of the weekend.
Oh, yeah. It's so social, and it was several years, 10 maybe years ago, we realized that, where we were traditionally focused on tournaments and events, that the social aspect came up fast and became, pretty much the focal point for most people traveling to Adepticon. Hang out with these people that they know from online communities or
you see them twice a year.
Painting forums. Yeah, right. And, people just have a blast. We just had our staff party last weekend, and it's kind of got a similar vibe. And we had staff from Phoenix and Nevada and California and Montana and Ohio all come in and just hang out for the weekend. And,
cool.
It's the same kind of vibe. So
yeah, that is very cool. And it's such a welcoming environment too. One of the main things we talk about on the show is about how anyone that you're going to find across from you on a table is, you probably have a lot in common. And then to see it play out on such a large scale and be growing together. Even Gen Con. Gen Con, last year Gen Con was my first time. And I still felt that way there as well. I felt like I could strike up a conversation about board games or card games or something with anyone there, role-playing games, and we were going to have a good talk. It's the exact same way at Adepticon. And I don't know if you have any designs on getting Adepticon up to Gen Con level.
I don't think that's within our...
who knows? Never say never. I'm just saying, but you've got the core there. You have the core of everything that matters. And then what you do with it is up to you. But the people coming are all in the right spirit and right frame of mind. And that is so nice to see. And that magnifies and amplifies the experience of anybody who comes and chooses to hang out with you guys that weekend.
I can say from planning this event year over year, and I've probably said to you this before, it burns you out hardcore toward the end, and you're sort of just don't know if I can do this anymore. And then I go to the event, and it is so reinvigorating. Not only just in the sense that I'm seeing all of these people and actually, being able to have a good time with them, but simultaneously, walking away from that event after seeing all the amazing hobby effort that people put forward, the excitement around the hobby, and it's infectious. And I leave there just, okay, it's over with. I have my time back. I cannot wait to play a game, paint a model, whatever it might be. And it brings me right back. So every time.
I've started my Adepticon planning. I've already started planning out my display board for the team tournament.
As you have to, I believe, yeah.
But that's the kind. But I'm not alone. There's a there's a community.
People start the next year while they're at the previous year.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there's a whole large collection of people in the community that are doing that exact same thing right now. And I know I'm kind of gushing a bit over the event. But that's because it's so good and I have such a great time. I do really, for me is that I come and I try to win the team tournament. That's what I do.
And And you have, right?
Oh yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's to win it is a bit of a chore, and you've got to start early, and everyone knows that. So most people that have any designs on winning know they have to start a little bit early. And whatever, I've placed really well over the course of the year, so that's not like my only metric for enjoyment is if I win or not.
Sure.
But I do know that if I even want to win, then I've got to kind of do certain things. There's almost like a path to victory that is so much different than the path to victory in a singles tournament or even another team tournament.
Yeah,
another
absolutely.
type of team tournament. So I'm deep in the phases of planning out that, lining up my steps and my objectives along the way.
Well, you may be interested to know, I'm 95% positive on this too, that there's going to be a move for a similar style event on the Sigmar side. And we're also looking at some of the other events out there to kind of, we've always tried to introduce the team event, whether it's doubles or whatever, almost to every major game system we run, right? So we're looking at ways to introduce that into a few other events also, which I think, doubles events are a little more manageable for people. On the 40K side, they've been running that Friday's double event. That's been pretty popular, alongside with the Friendly, which is a very different style event of 40K, and just really focuses 100% on having a good time. And that event has, people just love that event.
The Friendlies, they get cool t-shirts.
Yeah, it's become and bandanas and it's always themed around a goofy movie. I think last year was The Princess Bride.
Oh, nice.
Can't remember what this year is. I know what it is, but I'm drawing a blank. So, I mean, it's, we're doing things like that too, and because there was for a very long time, there are people outside of Adepticon that know about it that go, oh, that's a Warhammer tournament event. And that's they focus on that and that alone. And that's such a small percentage of what we're doing at the convention anymore. We have everything from historical games to Starship Bridge simulators to, the hobby seminars.
I'll run a role-playing game for those guys. Just get them in there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I got Carl from Independent Characters running role playing last year. I ran some role playing last year. Nick from Broken Contract ran some role playing. Yeah, so I dragged people in. So
oh, nice.
I'll be contacting you.
Yeah, I love Carl. Such a good dude. But that's part about is everybody's there. Everybody in this community is pretty much there at Adepticon. And so if you're, right. I mean, people that come, I don't think I'm telling anything new to anyone who actually does come and has been there the last couple of years. But if you're on the fence about coming, it's big, yes, and there's there's a little bit of intimidation in that, but it's still incredibly accessible.
Well, yeah, I mean, so we could tie all that together right now, because one thing I have been talking about to Carl about is they have been talking about trying to organize sort of a, hey, you're new to Adepticon kind of Wednesday night meet and greet. It's going to be very low key and chill and just kind of get people together, especially first timers or new people to the hobby.
All right, that's a great idea.
Put names to faces, and so on Friday when you're walking around, you can be like, "Hey, I know that person," or "Hey, and just have people start making those connections, because that's ultimately what's the most important thing at Adepticon, and is leaving on Sunday with 50 new friends, right?
That does sound great. Because it's still right in line with the community building. So yeah, whatever. Yeah. You guys are always innovating. You really are. And that's and I'm not saying that in a way that is a bad thing. That's good. You guys are always thinking about better ways to bring these experiences to people, and including doing things like partnering with some Geek Nation Tour stuff to have that level of involvement or experience. And then you've got stuff like just making sure there are enough kill team events or skirmish level events or something for everyone that wants to play to be able to play.
We try to, if we're running, say, a 4-person event, hey, on the side, there's also stuff to do if you're people that don't have a team or whatever it may be, some smaller scale stuff. Last year we made a big push with Kill Team as we moved away from kind of our traditional small scale format, which was a homebrew thing that we called Combat Patrol, which was probably from, some version of Combat Patrol 40K 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, that's what the rules sounded like that, yeah.
Yeah, so it sort of adapted over the editions, but when Kill Team came out, we embraced that. We built 32 brand new tables for that event last year and ran, 5 or maybe 6 sessions of that. With this year, we'll be doing something very similar with Warcry on the Age of Sigmar side.
Oh, Warcry is so fun. I played it.
Yep, I got a chance to play it last weekend.
I'm gonna do a full review on the show, but like on the main body of the show. But it's good. I enjoyed it. It's a flow to it. I mean, you know what's up. No armor or no armor save. You just roll.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be, you know, the small form factor events like that for us are great because there's so many of them now between Kill Team and Warcry and Underworlds and all of that stuff that we can actually dedicate a space to it and just, you know, get it going all weekend long. So, you know, we're definitely looking at, you know, creating enough new tables for Warcry. You know, we made a pretty big, train push on Adeptus Titanicus last year. And of course, we're always refining and upgrading what we can do on the Sigmar and the 40k side, making improvements. And then, you know, with the success, last year we had an extremely successful Middle Earth event also, which kind of came back from the dead for us. And, you know, now we're looking at needing, you know, 25, 30 tables of that too.
The new box set came with competitive stuff in the box set.
So yeah, I mean, you know, that'll be a big push. That's always a big, that never ends. That terrain refresh, just as you catch up, the edition changes, and then, you know, like a new game comes out, like it never ends. But, you know, one thing we're doing is kind of like training our staff and getting our staff tools and materials that help us build better, faster terrain. For the staff party last week, we had Kat and Caleb out from CK Studios, and we just had them run airbrush classes for, you know, free for the staff, like all weekend long.
Oh, that's nice.
It was incredible. They're absolute professionals and really put on it. Yeah. And I mean, however many years, 17 years of Adepticon, I can't remember the last time I sat in on a hobby seminar. Last year I made an effort to sit in on a couple as you know, I wanted to see what it was like from the attendee view. I mean, I just wanted to see how it felt, and I sat in on one of Caleb's like Airbrush 101 classes, and I was just like, this is amazing. Like, yeah, those were fantastic. And that got me to finally get over that, you know, the hill and really, you know, integrate airbrushing into my, you know, day-to-day, hobby stuff. And now, you know, we're moving into that on the train side. Just for Adepticon, just getting used to as much of the tools out there as we possibly can, so we can do it better, faster.
Yeah,
$6 million man style.
Well,
right?
you got people that actually know what they're doing, really teaching you. It makes a big difference.
Yep, it does help.
Yeah, dude, that's really cool. And this is all. So have you done much revamp for the 40k tournament side of things for terrain?
That is in the works right now. I know so we have several sets of terrain, right? Maybe like Necron tables, desert themed, whatever it might be. And every year we try to pick one or two of those sets and either completely redo them or make the necessary improvements to make those tables better. I mean, we're past the point of being able to, you know, tackle 300 tables of terrain in a year right now. But, you know, we got good basis for a lot of that. It might just like last year we introduced on the 40k side, lots of large line of sight blocking rocks and hills and stuff like that. And we'll continue to do stuff like that year over year.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought that it was a change from the previous year where the tables were a little feast or famine.
Yeah.
And there was some extra stuff on there to make it a game.
Sure.
You guys have always been good on terrain. I think there was 1 or 2 years, and now look at this, 1 or 2 years in the history of your 2-decade-long run at this. That had kind of rested on the addition of the past and tried to carry some terrain forward. But then it was just as simple, you guys just realized, I mean, through community feedback and your own ability or whatever, that, that's not going to work. Let's fix it. And then you fixed it. I mean, you guys are on top of it.
Well, there was the seismic shifts way back when we moved from, you know, area to true line of sight, which really kind of messed everything up, right? And that took more than, you know, just a summer to correct for that scale.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair enough. I'm happy with it. You guys have bid blocks of area terrain still that also happen to block line of sight.
And hey, if you're anywhere in the Illinois area and ever want to help, we have several train weekends down in Peoria, and we'll probably have some up here in Chicago, where we'll just be knocking stuff out pretty much from now until beginning of March. So we have a planning group on Facebook and stuff. So if anybody is in my area wants to get involved, we can find stuff to do.
What's new for next year?
Well, I mean, the big news is the Golden Demon is returning to the United States and will be hosted at Adepticon.
That's mega news.
Yeah.
Can I give an opinion as to why I think that's mega news, and you tell me if I'm wrong?
Sure.
So mega news one is Golden Demon. Golden Demon is become almost the slang term for fly figure, the awesome figure. Oh, that's Golden Demon status, or that's whatever qualities.
Sure.
It's a word for quality. But the fact that it's coming to Adepticon, I have to imagine means that it is supplanting the Crystal Brush.
Yeah, that is true.
And
so Crystal Brush had been at Adepticon for several years, and with a lot of the changes, CMON and Asmodee and all of that stuff, there was some question about the future of that event and whether or not who was going to run it, or if Adepticon was going to take it over, or if Asmodee still wanted to fund it. And, we had several talks. We had talks with them on the Crystal Brush side. Simultaneously, there was sort of this kind of talk about, hey, maybe we bring the Golden Demon back. And things just sort of lined up where it made sense as much as we loved having the Crystal Brush there over the years, that event, had kind of become its own thing. And, it was a very much professional painting competition. Not to say that the Golden Demon isn't going to bring out, some heavy hitters and be an extremely difficult competition to place in or win. But I think it does bring it maybe a little bit closer back down to kind of where we started. We used to do something called the Rogue Demon. That was our painting competition that we ran internally, until, the Crystal Brush came. And, one of the big things I think there are several people who come to our event that maybe are not on the Games Workshop side of things that enjoyed the fact that the Crystal Brush was an open event, where Golden Demon is going to be Games Workshop properties only.
Yeah, it was open, but it's also kind of really hard to judge some of these models next to another model in the same category because there's fewer frames of reference.
Honest, I mean, a lot of the models that were winning were custom sculpted pieces to begin with. I mean, they weren't even models you were buying. Yeah. People to understand that we are also going to be working with several other of our exhibitors. They're going to be running kind of side events. Like last year, Creature Caster kind of did one kind of late in the game, but they brought one in, and they've already announced it. I think they're calling it the Resin Beast, if I recall. And they're going to be running kind of exhibitor booth painting competitions for their models, and I expect to see that happen in other locations throughout Adepticon too. Yep. And one other thing we're working on too is, I think probably the big criticism that was leveled at any major painting competition is that it took it out of the realm of kind of the gamer and put it into the hands of the professional painter, which, as it should, because that's what that event does, and simultaneously it's bringing all these gorgeous models to the event.
Yeah, the great painters have just become that way because it's a natural progression for them.
And the models that it brings to put on display at Adepticon that you get to see up close and personal are, it's amazing. It's stunning. So, but one thing we've been thinking about is how do we, aside from just having all of these events that have a best painted award for an army or whatever it might be, what's the next step we could take to recognize the effort put into the models that are actually on the table playing games? And we're looking at kind of doing sort of a feeder style event where all of our single style championship events across the weekend that have a best painted category, whoever wins best painted, say in the 40k championship, say you win best painted, and then we say, all right, you get to choose one model from your best painted army, whatever it may be, maybe a vehicle, might be a special character, whatever, and you're going to submit that into kind of this, Adepticon best gaming model of the convention. I don't know what we're going to call it yet, but, and you may do that for 40k, and I might have someone that wins the War Machine Masters tournament do that, and someone that wins, a Sigmar event, someone that wins the Saga Grand Melee, and whatever it is. At the end of the day, we'll have our 20 miniatures, and then we'll have, we'll bring in our people to judge that, people from the hobby seminar side, or maybe get Dave Taylor involved, and people like that we've worked with in years past, and we'll build an award, several awards around that too. So, we're going to be doing that on the side, independent of the Golden Demon and all of that too. So there's going to be a lot more going on than just the Golden Demon, but the Golden Demon is huge, right? And that's going to be, bring out some amazing artists, going to be some incredible models. And, of course, Games Workshops, and Warhammer community being on site. There'll be lots of coverage of that.
That's going to be so cool.
It should be pretty exciting.
I know there's no way in all of creation am I going to be able to, do what any of these models have on display on my own, but I like to see what is the peak capacity of human potential.
Sure. It's crazy.
It's out of control.
Yeah. I know I will never even leave the Earth that those guys are orbiting, so, but that's good. I love to see that stuff. It's still
it's so weird. They take the same things that we have, the same paints, the same water. We could buy the same brushes, and they just do something totally different with them.
I've been painting a game called Shadows of Brimstone. I think I've talked to you about it for a long time, and the studio painter for them is Aaron Lovejoy, who also teaches at Adepticon. I painted 3 of these like swamp raptor kind of models, and then he throws his up, and I'm looking at his, and I'm like, I don't recall being that level of detail in the sculpt. Like, were there scales on that model that I just missed? And he said, oh no, I hand painted all of those. And I was like, oh my God.
That's how you do it.
Yeah.
That's how you do it. Man, that's crazy. So, okay, recap of what we talked about so far. Is it we're talking about Adepticon 2020, which is going to be March, 20-something? What?
25th through the 29th.
25th through the 29th. That's a little bit, maybe not as opposed to last time. You guys fluctuated a little bit, a week or two up, a week or two back, but it's always in that same time lane.
I think it's roughly the same weekend it was last year. Yeah. Yeah. That period of time, we, avoid the holiday, avoid the time change. So there, it's usually late March, early April.
Yeah. It's still winter though.
It can be. Yeah. We can, it can be, or it could be 80. Who knows?
Yeah. That's true. That's true. Room at the time of recording, room blocks are not available right now.
No, but it's right around the corner. So we've been working on a couple of extra details. So we're a little bit later than we were last year, but it's looking like we're going to be on schedule for, I believe, the second week of August. But we'll have a news release out on the website, Facebook page, all that.
You tell them to not do it while we're at Gen Con?
Yeah, it will be after Gen Con, yes. Because I'll be at Gen Con too. I won't have time to do it.
Yeah, dude, we gotta hang out.
I will be there.
Or something.
Yep.
Man, well, Matthias, it's such great talking to you, and I really appreciate you sharing what you can about the event. Is there anything else you think we should talk about before we wrap up?
I mean, I think, the only other thing that I really know for certain right now is that the Games Workshop preview night that's been happening Wednesday evening, we're really looking to take that to the next level, with, Games Workshop's presence, Warhammer community, and all of that at the event. We're looking at kind of bringing a new standard in for the preview nights, being able to accommodate more attendees in those. Games Workshop is, promising lots of exciting announcements. Of course, we'll always have Adepticon will always be the first event for the show model premiere. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, we're hoping that at the preview event on Wednesday, we'll also have the premiere of one of these new Warhammer television properties.
Oh,
so
wow,
the Eisenhorn, the one that the people from Man in the High Castle are working on. So there's a good chance that might happen also. So that could be super exciting if that happens. So,
whew, man, it's giving me the sweats just thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to start coming on, Monday night just to get ready.
It's gonna be cool. No, I mean, I'm sorry, but with seeing the previews and stuff, I mean, I want to. I do get in early. Yeah, I think I get in on Tuesday typically.
And then, event registration will open typically sometime in November. And that's actually where you register events. We'll take, event submission for us is starting to become a difficult thing because, right now I could just take my tables and say, okay, it's 98% full with what I know we're having. So, we may work with some people on the side to do event submission, but I don't know if we're going to really have a public event submission, this year. And then Reg will go in November, and we'll run, typically through, third week of February. So
I wouldn't miss this thing for the world. I really wouldn't. It's such a blast. Last year I did not play in the singles tournament. I had a severe case of fear of missing out, and I'm going to be playing again this year.
All right.
Yeah.
I can't miss this event, so.
You don't count. You just get to be enthusiastic for everyone else.
Yeah, I have to be there, I guess. That's what they told me. So.
They're making you be there. Well, dude, man, thanks a lot for coming and speaking with me about this. I'd like to catch up with you. And again, I know everyone's thinking, like, what is he talking about? It's way far away. Like, not for you, but they'll be doing things along the way that I'd love to touch base with you and hear about and talk about as we move closer to the show.
Yeah, for sure. We should have some, more exciting news toward the end of the year. And, check us out on Facebook and adepticon.org. Most of our news items go up there, and should be lots of stuff starting to roll in, between end of August and end of the year. So
I'll put those links in the show notes, man. Thanks a lot for coming on.
All right, Paul. See you at Gen Con.
Have a good night.
We're sponsored by Fermaterra. With their sturdy, lightweight and portable tables, you can make war anywhere. Please visit them at www.fermaterra.com.
Hey everybody, we are back. I got Chris and Jim here.
Still kicking.
And Ricky joined us.
I'm back. I actually have beef with Jim, so this may not be the best show for me to return on. His team spanked me horribly at ATC, and I'm still recovering. So this could be a fun night.
To be fair, I think you guys should not have played us. I think you got a buy of some kind.
No business.
There was
no business playing you guys. We lost our first round, got a bye, come back for day 2, and we're playing against you guys. And we're sitting there, and my buddies are like, "Hey, that's Jim Vassell over?" I'm like, "What? Wait, what?" And I'm looking at you guys. I'm looking at your all score, and I'm like, "Oh God, what happened?" Because they gave us a bye. We were 7th from the bottom after round 1. We got a bye. The last place didn't get a bye. We got a bye. And it shoots us up. We all basically got 21 points. The whole team got 21 points. Guess what? Our Grey Knight player should not have had 21 points, Paul. And so we end up. I get to meet Jim. His team was great. And
look at the opportunity.
I had a lot of time to walk around the event hall after the Necrons deleted my Harlequins off the table.
That's hilarious. They did announce how they were going to handle the buys, and so it was all, that's all how it played out. But.
Yeah. Well, I don't read, so.
Oh, no, it was in the captain's talk. That's right. We're too busy taking selfies at the captain's council to.
Oh, yeah, no. Were we supposed to be listening during that?
Let's talk about Warcry.
Let's do it. The coolest models that GW has put out in ages.
I had the pleasure of playing Warcry this past weekend, and I had a great time. It is different. It's not Necromunda. It's not Kill Team. It really is its own game, which I was kind of surprised to see the uniqueness of some of the, not every rule is unique, but just the style of how it played out and some of the stats on the creatures and models and stuff were a lot different than, what we've seen in other games.
I had it in my head. Somebody said it's basically a Kill Team for Sigmar. And you're saying it is not that. Don't expect to just be playing a Sigmar version of Kill Team.
That's right. It's not the Kill Team rules. The concept is pretty much the same, where you have, you're playing on the same size board, you're playing with a similar number of models, but the interaction and how the game plays is a lot different.
Okay, cool.
Right, but so is it though analogous more to Age of Sigmar? Because Kill Team obviously uses a kind of simplified version of 40k rules. So I would assume that Warcry uses a simplified version of Age of Sigmar rules. Is it more analogous to Skirmish Age of Sigmar?
Jim, I don't think the rules to Sigmar can get much more simplified.
Well, it's not. And let me go one step. Let me tell you what the similarities are, if I can anyway. Or at least if I could describe it in a way that may make sense. There's a series of stats of what you need to hit, how many hit points you have, and your movement and armor save and that kind of stuff is it's in a little circle on the Sigmar War Scroll. That's what the Data Slate's called. They're called War Scrolls, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. Yeah. Same thing.
That is the same, and that's basically where it ends.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I was trying not to interrupt there. But the War Scroll, I pulled one up here for the Iron Golems, and it looks exactly like, is this War Scroll that's on the website, is that to take those models and play them in Sigmar, or are these used exactly the same as they are in Warcry itself?
You get these cards that come in the set, and each model is on the card.
Oh,
on that
okay. Gotcha.
card, it's got a couple of symbols that tells you a little thing about it, what its faction is, and then sometimes what its rune mark, I think is what it's called. And those symbols let you key off to other abilities that you can use during the game. In that circle, the three things, it's got your movement, your hit points, and then your armor. Not your armor save. There is no armor save. It's toughness. Let me get that back. It's toughness, movement, and your hit points. And the first thing you'll notice on there is that the hit points are really high. Like your basic trooper has 10 wounds, or thereabout. Something along those lines. 10 plus wounds. Like the next level up, the one that would be like borderline elite type stuff, is like 15 wounds. This is for a single model. This is on a 28 millimeter. You hear there? It's a 28 millimeter base, not 25.
It's pretty cool. So the game's, would you say that the game is a little bit slower paced in the sense that stuff doesn't die super quickly?
It doesn't. But you get to, it's a you go, I go type mechanic, and then each model gets 2 activations. But you use them at the same time. So you could do things like double move once, then move again, or attack twice, or move and attack, or, that kind of stuff.
Okay, that's kind of reminiscent of Shadespire there, or of Underworld, so that's cool.
And then at the beginning of the turn, you roll 6 dice. It's very similar to the Silver Tower, if you guys have played that, where you roll the fate dice or whatever at the beginning.
I have not played that.
It's fun. Something you can sit down with people that have never miniature game before and play away. It's cool. But at the beginning of each round, you both roll your dice. They're not fate dice. I can get you the exact term, but you roll the dice. And then you're looking for either doubles and triples or quadruples of us, like you roll 4 twos or whatever, or you're looking for singles. And the number of singles that you roll, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, give you a count. And whoever rolls the most singles gets initiative, gets to act first in that round. And if there's a tie, you can roll off, and there's ways to like force a tie. You get a wild die, which is essentially like a command point that you get to use on each in a accumulate. If you don't spend it on a turn, you have another one to spend in the next turn, and that's a way you can kind of force either roll-offs for initiative or win initiative. Or I mentioned you're looking for doubles, triples, and quads. That's essentially your gas for the round to use special abilities. So say for instance you have 2 sets of doubles or whatever, you can say I'm going to use this ability that takes a double, a pair of dice with the same number, and you get to do that ability, do what it says. And there's
So if I understand correctly, and you haven't actually said this, but if you have more doubles and triples, you have a less chance to have initiative, because it sounds like whoever has the most singles gets to go first. So there's a counterbalance to the fact that if you have a lot of fuel, essentially, is that, am I understanding correctly?
Yes, exactly.
So I may get to go first, but you're going to be able to pull a few more tricks out.
Yeah, I may be able to pull off, an extra attack or an extra strength, or maybe, I pop an aura ability on one of my figures, where you would not have the triples and the quads because you got all those singles to go first.
That's cool. Let's pull that over to 40k. You give up some command points and you get to go first.
So we played, we didn't build the full warbands, and we just played a pitch battle, a match play pitch battle. There's the same styles of play. There's the open gaming, the narrative, and the match play stuff in Warcry. So that theme is consistent. And in the time it took to put together 5 models from each faction, we had the rules mastered, everything broken out, and we're playing the game. I mean, I didn't have the terrain put together, so we didn't get to use there's like jumping and falling rules and stuff that you can do, and there's maneuverability and stuff that you can take advantage of, once you master that side. So we didn't get to those rules yet, but we were able to play what was a very enjoyable game with a short amount of lead time.
I'm going to need you, since you clearly did not care about the terrain, I'm going to need you to just mail that to me.
That terrain is awesome.
It looks awesome. That looks
great.
I'm the most I'm weird about terrain. I love terrain, right? And people complain at our tournaments because we always have too much terrain on the table, because I love it. And I want the terrain out of this thing.
Yeah, it's going to make its way into like a display board or something.
Easily, yeah. Can you be knocked off of the terrain? Like in
can.
Necromunda, you could be knocked off, and I love that kind of rule. That's super cool. So you could do that.
I'm a little fuzzy on this, but I believe like if you score a crit on somebody that's on the edge of the terrain, like an edge of a cliff or whatever, you can knock them off.
Oh, I love stuff like that. Stuff like that makes the game just so exciting.
And,
it makes the terrain matter.
Do you feel like, so one of the cool things about Kill Team and even like Warhammer and Necromunda was that, the boxes came with this terrain, but you could go then build, this crazy hive spire with, multiple levels and stuff like that, where it was literally just like, I don't know if you guys saw some of the Kill Team tables at Adepticon this year, or sorry, at Nova last year.
Nova's terrain was insane.
And they were, for a Kill Team, they were like, 3 feet tall of building. So does the game lend itself to doing, like, using a lot more terrain than, say, what's included in the box? Or is it more like 40k where it's like a certain amount of terrain is good, but too much can actually be detrimental?
I mentioned that there are rules for jumping and stuff. So I have to believe that if you wanted to build, a more vertical type of combat environment that you could. For overall playability, I'm not sure yet. You have to be within the confines of that playmat, because when you're deciding deployment zones and missions and that kind of stuff, there are cards that tell you where to deploy within the confines of that space. It's like a 40k deployment map or whatever, but it tells you, your reserves have to come in from this spot. You separate your army into 3 different categories. There's the shields, the spikes, and the daggers, or something like that. Forgive me for butchering it, but there's 3 different categories, and you get to decide how you do that. A third of your army has to go into the shield or whatever, but then you get to sprinkle out the rest of the stuff, and that includes like reserves and stuff, and the map and those cards will tell you where to put your stuff and where it comes in and how it does. So you got to play within the confines of that, but there seems to be very solid rules for the vertical interaction.
So you could build the Varen Spire, or as they call it, up to Archaon.
Yeah, you absolutely can. I don't see any reason why you shouldn't either. So that's very much in the theme of the game.
I do have to say, though, I was super excited for them to come out with a game where it was all chaos, and then I was quickly disappointed to learn that there was non-chaos factions. If it was up to me, it would just be chaos and more chaos. Kind of like the Gorka Morka, but chaos.
It's a lot chaos. Is that enough?
They can't, not let the poster boys in there. You gotta have them.
That's true.
So there are actions you can take one of the actions you can take is waiting, and that gives you the opportunity to kind of play with initiative a little bit. I think I actually got a slight edge. Now, look, we built 5 of these figures without any really awareness of what was good or what wasn't good or what was going to play out or whatever. So the game that we played is not, I don't think is a valid test for viability of an army or telling you one thing's good or better than the other. We didn't play that kind of game. We just played to get the mechanics down. And so I don't know if we played with equally matched stuff, but there are point values on the stuff, and then we had about a fairly equal point thing. I will say that the Iron Golem, the actual the beefcake guy, he is a truck. He's got 30 wounds. And he's got really cool special abilities you can trigger that let him steal.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
The models, GW again and again has shown why they are the #1 miniatures company in the world, which is not just the aesthetic and the sculpts of the models, but also from a technical aspect. The way some of the newer snap fits go together and the level of detail, it's just incredible. And the thing that I was most excited to see is that, being an ex-fantasy player and obviously a chaos player, is that they've snuck in, some of the old references. Like you got Chaos Dwarf in there, which is something that, really calls back to 6th, 7th edition fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got these cool models from these different realms in the mortal realms, and they're, Tzeentchian cults and Slaneshi cults and kind of undead chaos cults, and it's just such a cool, addition to the background, and I think that's the thing that's really drawn me to the game.
Being a chaos player, have you seen the Fury model?
Yeah, they look, what they really remind me of? The roller skate monkeys from Wizard of Oz. I don't know why they give me that vibe. But I don't know what those are called, but the Fury models are amazing. They have so much character. They look like these little mischievous gremlins with wings. They're awesome. I really hope they release. Well, actually, there is a standalone pack of the beasts, it sounds like, with the kind of Raptor dudes. I don't know what those are called, but
Raptor X.
Raptor X's, yeah, those guys. So those guys are cool too. So the 40k rules unfortunately are pretty horrendous, but I definitely feel like I got to paint a few.
So there's universal abilities that anyone can use, and they go off the same gas, the doubles, the triples, and the quad, and then each faction has their own unique abilities. I mean, I'm a fan. I'm going to be playing more of it, and the models look amazing, and all the new factions and stuff. And the fact, I mean, I think it's cool that you can use some of the existing Sigmar models, but I'm way more excited about using these new things. I mean, they are totally different than what a lot of the other factions out there. It's very similar to the Necromunda gangs.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about getting to play Necromunda is I get to step out of the big war, the Space Marines on, Chaos or this and that or whatever, and just pick up these grungy gangers and fight. And so Warcry kind of, I like the idea that I could just step away from Stormcast Eternals or the big popular armies or the big overall battle and just get 5-6 models on the table and try something new. And I'm like, these Furies to me look super cool. I love the look of them. There's
twists that can happen in the game, and that's when these like beasts and stuff. I mean, we didn't play with this in the test, but that's when the stuff becomes relevant and comes out, and like random encounters and stuff.
So extra stuff will come out like while you're fighting stuff?
Yeah, I think so. That's the case with the twist.
That's kind of cool, yeah.
I mentioned that things have a ton of hit points. Well, there's no armor saves in the game, and I mentioned that a little while ago, but when you roll to hit, it's like it's strength versus toughness. So you've got a certain amount of attacks you're trying to wound, and if you roll a 6, then you activate their crits, and each weapon has a standard hit profile and then a crit hit profile, and some of them are, some of the standard hits do 1, and then some of the crits do 4 or 8 or whatever. I mean, it can be pretty explosive when you're looking for that 6. So there's that kind of endorphin rush part of the game, and I think that helps offset some of the wounds. When we were playing our game, we didn't have I kept going into my my role playing game dice bag and getting out same 20s, 8-sided, 12-sided, or whatever, and trying to find an effective way to count hit points along the way.
GW to make some nice little wound counters.
They probably have them. I just don't have them. But I enjoyed it. I mean, it's this game. It had the fact that the learning curve for it, like the learning the rules, did not seem to be the hard part. The hard part is going to be the same thing. It's figuring out when to activate what, knowing which ability to activate when, knowing when to apply your weight actions versus your more active ones. Yeah.
Yeah. I like games like that where you can explain it to someone in a few minutes and then take months to really master every aspect of the game. Cause that makes you feel like you're, like when you win a game, it's because of your skill and not just the dice.
Yeah, there's a few models. It looked like the Untamed Beast faction is a little bit more crafty than the brute force of the Iron Golems. And I don't think we played that well enough. Like I'm not sure that we really factored in the range. Like some weapons, even there are things like whips and flails and that kind of stuff. They have more range. That's like a Sigmar element to where they can attack from further away. I mean, that's what range means.
Yeah. Well, if you're not if you're not accustomed to Sigmar, we're a 40k podcast, so most of our people are 40k players and not necessarily Sigmar. But that's one of the neat things about melee combat in Sigmar is that somebody may have a 2-inch range or a 3-inch range on a melee weapon instead of just, you're in base contact, you're within 1 inch of, someone, that, you have to measure the range of the weapon. And it's neat because you can be behind something and your opponent may not necessarily be able to get to you to swing, but you can swing at them because you have a pole arm or something. Yeah. And that's a really neat thing about Sigmar, and I guess in this game as well. So that'll be it's a very important aspect of a game when your melee weapons have different ranges.
Well, this Ogor Breacher is a truck, and I enjoyed using him a lot.
He looks like a wrecking crew, just like somebody drove past the construction site.
One-man brute squad.
Yeah. Let's put that on a dude's arm.
Well, he's got this ability that he can just bowl over people. And it's I think it's a triple ability. And the way the triples and the doubles and the quads work, sometimes like a trip 5 is more powerful than a trip 1 because you do 1 extra damage, or if you roll trip 5s, then it's 5 extra damage or something like that. So the number you roll matters as much as the amount of the die that you roll. So there's these neat little variances in the game that don't bog it down with too much complexity. It's just, do you go first or do you have the gas? And then what do you do with your floating wild die to influence either one of those two things in the beginning, and then the turns go quick.
How long does a typical game take? Is it supposed to be around?
We played with fewer figures than probably we were supposed to, but it went
length
20-30 minutes. I mean, it was quick.
Nice.
It was quick. All right, well, guys, let's take a quick break. Then we'll come back and talk 40k chaos stuff. I'm kind of brewing up some Chaos Knights and Demon stuff. Want to weigh that versus, can a Knight replace Mortarion? That kind of stuff. Come back in a second.
FTN is also on Facebook. Please like us at www.facebook.com/Forge the Narrative.
We are back. Thanks for hanging in with us. This is going to be a long show. Going to air some thoughts on Chaos Knights. Is anything better than the Helm of Warpsight?
The Corn Relic, I believe.
The Cornate Target.
Cornate Target.
Okay.
I think is up there.
Let me preface this, that these relics have like a god associated with some of them in the name, but it's a name only. So if you're like a Nurgle purist and you want to take the Tzeentchian Pyrothrone or the Cornate Target, rock it out, because in your mind it can be whatever, call it whatever you want. There's no mark association with this stuff.
Right, exactly.
Can we also preface this entire conversation with that Chaos Knights are stupid, and if you play Chaos Knights, you're a loser, because Imperial Knights are the only Knights anyone should be playing.
We can preface it, but you'd be wrong.
All right, so the Helm of Warpsight is the one that allows you to ignore hit modifiers. When resolving an attack made with ranged weapons by a model with this relic, ignore hit roll modifiers. And the Cornate Target is once per battle at the start of the fight phase, a model with this relic can activate it. When it does, until the end of that phase, invulnerable saves cannot be made against attacks made with this melee weapon by that model, and invulnerable saves cannot be made for that model. So let's hear why. Now, why is? I mean, I think you're going to probably mention Plague Bearers.
Yep.
Are there any? Can you see applications outside of that?
Right. So the first thing I will state, which is just kind of dialing it back 1 second, which is that the strength of the Chaos book isn't so much that they have those two relics, which are both great, powerful relics, but the strength of the book is that you can choose which one of those you want at the start of every game. So they both are situational, and I think in certain matchups you might want to go with the Helm, and in certain matchups you might want the Cornate icon. And I think that is really the strength of the book. It's not like the Imperial book where you might have a single strong build that you kind of run with. The Chaos book is very, very versatile, and it's able to be very dynamic with the way that the stratagems and the relics and the warlord traits are designed, and the Dreadblade as well. So I actually think the correct kind of approach to building a list with the Chaos Knight is to actually not specialize too much and give yourself the option to tailor to each opponent. So that's kind of my preamble, I guess.
Yeah. So what do you think the best knight to hang some of this stuff on to have give you a good pivot is?
Well, again, I don't think there's any one question. So the thing to understand about Chaos, the Chaos Knight book, and as far as like competitive books, I definitely feel like the Imperial Knight book is stronger. So I hope that makes you happy.
Yes.
And the reason I believe it's stronger is because, so the role of the Imperial Knight in the Imperial Army is for the fire support, and it does that very, very well. House Raven is a big part of that. The multiple weapon relics that enhance the shooting, so the Endless Fury and some of the other, Cause Wrath obviously is a big one as well. So the Imperial Knight book, a lot of the relics and traits are centered around increasing the firepower output, whereas in the Chaos Knight book, a lot of the relics and tools center more around utility. So I almost look at the Chaos Knight book as a book that adds utility to the Chaos Army as a whole, the Chaos faction. unfortunately, Chaos already has a lot of utility. So a lot of the things that the Chaos Knight book adds from a utility standpoint, Chaos already has. So, we have Death Hex, right? So that coordinate target is incredible, but, you also have Death Hex on three of the 4 Chaos books have access to that. So in that sense, the utility is slightly mitigated. And what I will say is that what Chaos is really lacking is good long-range firepower. So if you look at all the Chaos books and most of the Chaos builds, it is a close combat orientated faction. All the way from Death Guard to even Chaos Space Marines. There's a few shooty Chaos Space Marines if you kind of go down the Don Husen route with the Forge World Dreadnoughts. But all in all, Chaos has always been a combat-focused faction with not amazing shooting units. And I really feel like that's the niche that the Chaos Knight book fills for Chaos. Whereas with the Imperial book, it enhances an already deadly shooting phase.
Yeah, okay, I'm with you.
So I think where that leaves us is that you're going to have these Chaos Knights. So there's the 2 types of Knights.
The Iconoclast and the Infernal.
Infernal, sorry. So the Infernal I actually feel like has more utility because you have access to one of 3 kind of abilities. And I think on a shooting Knight, you're going to have a little bit more options on that. Whereas with the Iconoclast... The Demonic
Surge, pick what you want, take the D3 roll and
right.
Face.
And the great thing with that is you can do that to multiple Knights in a turn. And one thing that is really interesting and kind of it's kind of a bummer about the Chaos Knight Codex, and I don't mean to sound too much of a Debbie Downer, but a single Knight slots a lot easier into an Imperial book than a Chaos Knight, because the Chaos Knight, the Iconoclast, like the essentially the house traits, are only available if you take a super heavy detachment. They're not available if you take a super heavy auxiliary detachment, which is similar to the Imperial Knights. But for Chaos, the strength of their Knights comes from those abilities, whereas the Imperial Knights, the house traits are not necessarily where the strength of the book comes from. So, you can have a Raven Castellan with Raven Stratagems and the Raven Gun, and you can't do the same thing with Chaos because you're not getting your strength if you just run a single Knight, which is unfortunate.
Do you think this codex stands as a standalone codex? If you're playing pure Chaos Knights, you think it performs better than a pure Imperial Knight list?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, the reality is that the Chaos Knight book, there's essentially 5 or 6 there. There's 5 entries. I don't necessarily, and there's way less options. So with Imperial Knights, at least you have multiple houses. You have certain stratagems that actually are game changing. So for instance, Chaos doesn't get the ability to fight at full bracket, and that is actually massive.
Yeah.
That's a massive disadvantage to Chaos. Guns, as far as offensive output, are not as good as the Imperial. Like things like the Endless Fury. Yes, having the extra strength and extra damage on your Gatling gun is great, but you're also paying that in wounds. And, when you have 24 wounds and no way to fight at full bracket, that can be really devastating to lose. If you just do that for 3 turns, that's 3d3 wounds that you could lose just from your own abilities. It could be 9 wounds. That's almost half your wounds. So, there are ways to get it back, but they're unreliable at best, right? So you could
gotta get in close combat. You gotta have something heal you or something. Some of
right.
these unlikely situations if you are burning them early in the game.
And the thing to understand too is, look, Knights have been on the block for over a year now. I think it was around June last year they came out. And what did they do? They completely shifted the meta. They completely changed how people play, how people build lists, because you have to be able to handle Knights. And then Chaos comes along, Chaos Knights, and they got, the same things, but a little bit less defensive and just as easy to kill. So, there's nothing new. There's nothing so new and kind of game changing in this book that all of a sudden they're going to start, Knights are going to kind of rise above the meta again. I think what you're going to see is a single Knight or, maybe a detachment of 2 War Dogs plus a Despoiler in a Chaos list as a kind of slot in some shooting and some utility. But ultimately, I don't think you're going to see the kind of triple Crass Crusader version of the Chaos Knights. That's also not to mention that our Gallant is 20 points more than the Imperial version. And our Gatling cannons went up by 10 points each. So our double Gatling cannon, which was kind of what was the Chaos bread and butter and what they were known for, also is almost as expensive as a double battle cannon Knight now. So there's just some disadvantages there. I don't think it's all bad. I've been playing around with a few lists myself. It's definitely kind of I'd say like a high, I'd give it like a B plus, A minus as far as like competitiveness. I wouldn't put it in there as far as like the top codexes.
Solid, not going to shift the meta any, really, and the chaos purists are going to love having rules for their knights, is what it sounds like, and it's...
Well, I kind of want to argue that I like the idea that they can give you that long range reach out and touch someone with the option of, downing a flyer or whatever. And I think Chaos kind of struggled on the kill on the flyer stuff.
Yeah, but like when you can put 3 Daredeos in your list for how many points is a Daredeo? I can't
600 for 3. They're about 198.
Yeah, they're so good. I mean, I would honest to God, I think I'd rather have those than a knight or a couple of knights in a list. So they're just
you can slot them into normal detachments too.
Yeah, you're not having to do crazy stuff to get them, and they get bonuses they get bonuses to flyers if they don't move or whatever. The chaos Daredeo is so much better than the Imperial one because they don't have to take the Adamantic Pavase. They get the invul save. They're just fantastic, and they can get cover much easier if they need it. You're not hiding at night.
Right. Yeah, I definitely feel like, I agree with you in that sense where I think if you look at pure efficiency, a spearhead of 3 purge Daredeos plus, like, say, a Warpsmith, you're looking at just over 600 points. I think that the problem is if you want to have an effective knight, you're going to have the knight plus 2 war dogs because it's the only way you're going to get the household ambitions. The ambitions, the infernal ambition, and I think if playing the knight without those is a huge downside because that's not being able to slot in that knight detachment in with other things makes it a really, really hard choice. It's a reason that you're not seeing things like fortifications because they have 4 books currently, I guess 5 books now with this Night book. And that's obviously not including things like Renegade Guard or anything like that. But I think it's just gonna be really tough to fit them in. At the end of the day, and to kind of counter your point, Paul, I actually think Chaos, the current meta Chaos, you have Demon Princes which can pop up, and then you have Smites which basically ignore all the mechanics of flyers. I generally find the flyer matchup fairly straightforward because the thing with flyers is they can't generally hide the whole game. At some point, they're going to have to come towards you. Otherwise, they can flap the board.
Yeah, that's very fair.
Yeah, and once they come into your little death bubble, 2 or 3 casters and a Demon Prince, picks up a flyer and a half a turn. So I think where you're going to see this more is if you're playing, say, more pure Chaos Space Marines, and you want to play more traditional style list. I think that's where the Knights give you those options, and that's going to be fun to play. I have like a Knight kind of spearhead, I guess, or a lance or whatever they call them, and I'm excited to play a few games with it. So definitely.
I mean, let me know how it goes. I mean, I guess I like playing with the big boys, and I like. I've been kind of flirting around in my head with a demon list and using some of those tricks that I've kind of talked about before. You're bringing in splitting horrors and that kind of stuff. Just to kind of make a little bit of a target priority confusion with the opponent, simply based on ITC scoring. And different mission sets may not be as good, but I think there may be some advantages in the way that works for some killing one, not being able to kill one, not being able to kill more kind of thing, getting incremental points each round.
Yeah, and I think the good Chaos Knight player will have 2 or 3 loadouts, so to speak, depending on the opponent, and will be able to kind of tailor their loadouts and their relics, traits, Dreadblade. The Dreadblade rules are actually, there's been some hate on the Dreadblade rules. I actually don't think they're that bad. You can mitigate most of the downside pretty easily depending on the type of knight you're building, and I think there are some certain matchups where it's worth it, and again, you get to choose that before the battle, so you can pick that. Say you're playing against orcs with Ludas, you can grab the Dreadblade trait that gives you immunity to AP1 weapons. All of a sudden, your knights are getting that 3+ save. So there's definitely versions of it where it's worth it.
I like it, and I agree with your assessment that they're not going to be for every list, and they probably won't replace some of the power builds that are out there. But I like having those big stompies, and when you can put the decent weapons and then buff them, I think there's some play there, especially if the other stuff stays as efficient as it is, like Plague Bearer. Plague Bearers are incredibly efficient for what they do right now, and I do think there's some play in the horrors and in Bloodletter Bombs. I mean, they're not point necessarily efficient, but sometimes they can kind of come out of nowhere and win some games. So there's these guys do, I think, mesh better maybe with demons than just traditional Chaos Space Marine stuff.
Absolutely.
That's my thoughts. I got to play test it. I have not put this brew on the table yet because I'm not sure where I wanted to go, but that's going to be the core. I want to kind of have a Chaos United type list, most of the points wrapped up in demons.
It would be so much fun if you could take 4 detachments in a 2,000-point game. That would open up the meta so much. It'd be awesome.
What would you do in that 4th detachment?
I don't know. Maybe that's where maybe my Chaos Knights come in, or I think maybe fortifications. You'd see a lot more fortifications. That would just be really cool.
As a quick aside, like you brought up fortifications before, and so that maybe because of the 4 sword slots is why we're not seeing them. Is there a fortification that you think is on the cusp of making it?
So, I mean, generally with Chaos, the Feculent Gnarlmaw has seen a lot of use in the past, and that's generally in those Plague Bear Horde lists with, especially in ETC format where board control is so important. If you're running, 120, 150 Plague Bears, the Feculent Gnarlmaw is great. I know at ATC I saw a few Imperial Bastions. I've seen some very horrendous to play lists with the Sky Shield landing pad, like unchargeable armies with, Caladius tanks on top of the Sky Shield, so that you literally had to get to the very bottom because you got to charge up the Sky Shield plus minus 2 inches. Like, I've seen some pretty horrendous things like that in the past that are just, you just don't want to play.
That's dirty. I have not seen it.
Yeah, it's very dirty. Yeah, I've seen it. It's not fun to play against because you literally can't charge the army because you have to actually. The Sky Shield is essentially like a hill, right? So essentially, you get to put your models on a hill and then also give them minus 2, and it's just nasty. So I think there are some like that. I really wish that you maybe got a fortification slot in a battalion detachment or a supreme command or some other. There's another way to get a battalion into your army. I definitely feel like the terrain that GW's come out with has been incredible. The Noctilith Crown, the kind of Chaos Stargate, it looks incredible. And you just never see it because that 3rd detachment slot is just so important.
Yeah, fair enough. You've seen people use like the plasma obliterators in the past, and I'm just curious if there was one like a breakout fortification that no one's taking only because of this viability, and you never know.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to be able to field some of that stuff, some of that silly stuff. I actually played Michael Snyder at Nova last year, and he had I think it was an Imperial Bastion in his Tyranid army. And the way Nova works, basically, you have these big L's in the middle, and so he just placed this bastion in his deployment zone, and it could actually it could see over the L's, because it was this tower. So he had, and then he put Gene Sears in it,
great.
And basically it gave the Gene Sears this 360-degree 23-inch bubble. So you had this 48-inch this circle that had a 24-inch radius, which is massive if you actually see how big that is. In the tower, he had these Gene Stealers, and they could basically just pop out in any direction, and I thought it was pretty funny. And of course, there was no rule against fortifications holding objectives, so he would place it, basically right on top of an objective, making it very credible, very, very difficult to get to. So that was pretty funny.
I think they do hold objectives, right? I mean,
they do. That's what I'm saying.
Even now they hold objectives.
Yeah, there's no rule against it. So
did he plan that height thing with the L's, or would that just work out?
Yeah, that. That was all part of the reason he brought it. I think he was trying to be a sneaky, and I think by the time it was his kind of sneaky meta breaking item, I don't think it ended up helping him out in the end, but it was pretty funny.
I kind of wish it did because I hate those L's. Those L's just ruin every time I do anything. Those L's get in my way. I don't care what army I bring.
I don't know. For me, Michael Snyder ruins everything. So speaking as a TO and with great love, yeah.
Oh, now Ricky's blaming the terrain. That's
only those L's. Only those. Those L's were responsible last year. Was it last year or 2 years ago? We had this. We did a team event at Nova. It was that first year they did that little team tournament, and it was a doubles or something. We watched Gilliman on Gilliman charge each other down the hallway between those two L's. And it was the bottom of turn 1 or something. Both teams just charged Gilliman in through there, and they just killed each other. And we're like, okay, well, let's play normal 40k now. And so, had a great game with L's, I swear.
Now that those pesky Primarchs are out of the way, we can get to playing real 40k.
Yeah.
What's funny though? The Nova L's are it's kind of a meme at this point. Everyone knows about the Nova L's, but people often transcribe rules that they play at one event into other events. So often, obviously in Nova, you can't land on top of those L's. But the amount of times in non-Nova games, we've had like, say, Nova-style L's in the middle, and people have like landed planes on top, demon princes on top. Because like outside of Nova, there's no real rule that you can't do that. Yeah. And it's kind of similar to the Magic boxes, where it's like, Magic, the whole enclosed ruins, that was like an LVO, BAO specific rule. But now, like every tournament you go to, if there's like a house, it's a Magic box. It doesn't matter that there's no rules for that was like an event specific rule. Just the community and the tournament scene as a whole has just adopted those like rules as kind of universal at this point. You know what I mean? So I always find it really funny.
That's the blessing and the curse of LVO. It's so huge, and Frontline is massive with their influence, right? So when they rule something, it's gonna go out to the masses, right? And everybody's gonna pick up on those rulings and stuff. We've had to say stuff at our tournaments and be like, Magic boxes specifically. There no Magic boxes here, and we have to rule, and we don't really play any differently than the rule book itself says, but we always kind of have to address those things because so many of us go to all these tournaments and everything. You almost forget what the regular rules of 40k are because LVO has these rules, Adepticon might have these. You're trying to remember what the actual rules of 40k are when you sit down to play a game, and it's
thankfully we've got a really documented rule system, like base rule system with the FAQs and the chapter proofs and stuff. We've got those core things locked in. Everyone knows what to expect, and you can always refer to the printed stuff on the mothership's webpage for most of the things that are out there.
Yeah, that's we try to. Me personally, that's why I kind of just default to GW rules. If it's a GW rule, then it's the rule. That way, I don't have to explain all this other stuff. Is it on the GW website? Yes.
Fair enough. There you go. Well, guys, speaking of the folks at Frontline, if I can take us real serious for a moment, our heart is with them. Our heart is with the friends and family of Jeff Robinson, who passed away by the time you hear this show a few days ago. And such an influence on the hobby, friend of the show. I can say as a buddy, been on the show several times, and always happy to have been around him and being able to share his thoughts and the way he presented things. And it's a real tragic loss to the community.
Yeah, I followed Jeff a bit in StarCraft before I knew he was involved in 40K, and knew he was on the show a couple times, and I interacted with him at big events and things across the world, and it's very surreal to think of someone with that big personality just being gone out of nowhere. But that is nothing compared to the friends, the close friends and family who must be feeling just awful, still in shock of what happened. From what I understand, there was a bulldog charity, like a SoCal bulldog rescue, that if people were interested in donating something in his name, that was a charity that he was fond of. I'd look up on his Twitter account if that's something that you're interested in doing, and showing some respects for him, paying some respects for his memory and the good he did in the community.
Yeah, this has been really a weird one for me. I mean, I wasn't super close to Jeff, like some of the guys down in FLG, but I've been following Jeff for many years on YouTube and through some of his StarCraft days. Obviously, as a 40k personality, and then, in the last, since, last 3 or 4 months, like, I had gotten to know Jeff a lot better. We got to obviously play at BAO in the finals, which was great. I actually started communicating to him, kind of independently. He had a YouTube show called The Deadpan Diaries that I followed, and I watched, and it was a really, really good show about, life and love and relationships and people. And, Jeff was such a larger than life personality, and he you really felt like you knew him, and you knew this guy. And, when I found out on Saturday, it was surreal because I literally had just been tweeting him and messaging him on Messenger about, we were talking about, the Eisenhorn series from Dan Abnett. We were sending messages back and forth, and then next thing I know, he's gone. And, today I watched the, Signals from the Frontline with, Reese and Frankie, and they had a really touching, conversation about him, and man, it was hard to watch. It was so hard to watch. It really, really Sorry. It really just makes you appreciate and put into perspective how fragile life is, and how, the people that you care about and the people that you love can be gone so quickly. It was so hard to watch because, we were talking about it in our circle of friends, and, the thing we realized is it could have been any of us. It could have been any of our friends, any of our gaming buddies, or any of our really close friends. And, Jeff had such an impact on the community as a whole, and both in StarCraft and in Warhammer. It's just unbelievable what happened. And, obviously my thoughts are with his friends and family. And, it's just hard to take, to be honest.
It is. When I saw it, come up on Twitter, it's almost like, is this for real? Is this a joke? And then, as the hour goes by, you realize it isn't. And then the same thing, I echo your thoughts, and thank you for sharing those words, is that this is, you hug the people close to you. You never know, right? It's terribly tragic is probably still an understatement. But to the people that have been impacted in our community, our hearts are with you, and, we're all connected on this. And it is a huge loss. And I hope the people that can find comfort in others sharing some of this, the burden of the sadness with them.
Yeah. And I think the best thing that we can do to continue to honor his memory is to promote and build a great game and community of gamers to respect each other, and to continue just trying to be as awesome as we can, bring more people into this game, make it something that we can all be proud of.
Absolutely.
I'm going to end the show here. I'm not going to play our normal exit music and message and stuff. Just going to say good night, everybody, and thanks for sharing these thoughts, and thanks everybody for hanging in for the whole show. Real sorry I missed last week. My travel schedule is slowing down. I don't have much of anything coming up that should impact the releases of the show, and I really appreciate everyone being patient with us, as I've been a lot more hectic over the summer than I expected to be. Jim,
that's life, man.
Jim, thanks for joining us today. Ricky, great to have you back.
Glad to make it.
For sure.
Chris,
thanks for having me as always.
Ever stalwart.
I feel like I finally made it, because the last few times we chatted, I was the segment that got inserted, but now I'm like on the main show, so I feel like I've leveled up a bit.
The big show.
Come with us on Wednesday.
That's right.
Well, that's what we record for people that don't know. Well, again, thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will talk again next week.
All right, thanks, Paul. Bye bye.
Sounds good.